This is Share the Vision, presented by the Resource Center, a discussion of the programs and services of the Resource Center and about issues related to individuals with disabilities. On January 14th, the Resource Center held an event called All Aboard. It was a gathering of the boards of directors of the Resource Center, TRC Foundation, and the Filling the Gap Network. You'll hear a summary of that session today on Share the Vision. Here is Paul Chisana, Executive Director at the Resource Center, to explain what they hope to accomplish.
When Dr. Jacobson suggested that we think about an event that provides the opportunity for the various members of the various board of directors from the Resource Center and the various corporations to get together, we thought that was a great idea because we know that both board members and staff are involved in a myriad of different activities and different efforts. And sometimes it's not as easy to appreciate the connection between one entity and another. So again, the purpose of tonight's get-together, to make sure that we are all aboard, is to provide you with some information. Again, it's very illustrative. It's not to really bore you with year-end formal reports. It's just to give you a sense of some of the things that have taken place in the various corporate entities. And as importantly, to realize kind of how we started with a little entertainment, that everything we do is really, truly an effort and a commitment to impact on the lives of people and making a difference in people's lives.
Paul Chisana made reference to the entertainment provided by the Voices of Hope, a choir made up of people who receive services from the Resource Center. The program last Tuesday at the Resource Center's administrative offices on Dunham Avenue outside Celeron ran to some length. You'll hear only brief summaries from many of the participants on Share the Vision today. Paul Chisana also made reference to Dr. Jacobson, Todd Jacobson, president of the Resource Center's Board of Directors. He was the first speaker at All Aboard.
The Resource Center Board, we've been struggling for probably the past 3 years now with significant deficits. It's a perfect storm of government rulings, if you have it. We had the elimination of cost of living increases and fees, yet our costs keep going up. We had elimination of appeals of overages in special circumstances. We used to always count on that to make us whole eventually. Sequestration with its huge cut in Allied Industries orders, and the loss of our one remaining relief valve there to allow us to continue providing key mission-directed work that does not break even. And lastly, increasing regulations with no revenue to pay for them. In response, the Resource Center has undergone a huge change in operations, personnel, to allow for cost savings, and many of our sister organizations here have been involved in such. Over the past year, our projected deficit for 2013 is $2 million, and a number of break-even initiatives have been implemented over the past 3 years, and that's reduced the loss in non-affirmative business programs by more than $4.1 million since 2011. But unfortunately, sales and associated affirmative business profits have declined dramatically during the same period, preventing the organization from achieving the positive financial results desired. Despite these losses, the agency has been able to maintain a positive cash flow, and when projecting the positive trends in financial operations, we're confident of a projected break-even budget for 2014.
Dr. Todd Jacobson, president of the board of the Resource Center, addressing many of the challenges that TRC has faced not only in 2013, but in several recent years. The next speaker is the Associate Executive Director of the Resource Center, Denise Jones.
I'm here to talk about OPWDD services, Office for Persons with Developmental Disabilities. Actually, the foundation and the roots of our organization, that's why we started, was to serve individuals with developmental disabilities. To frame what happened in 2013, I do have to jump back a little bit to just give you some history and a sense of where we've been going, where we've been, and where we're heading toward. Each of those services comes with its own unique set of regulations. There's been a trend for OPWDD and a real push to provide services in the environment the least restrictive environment, which means there's a push from those site-based services to services that are provided actually in the community and going back to in-home services. So we've had a lot of pressure on that the past couple of years. To step it back a little bit further, in 2003, for our OPWDD services, we had a couple of things happening, some storms going on with us as an organization, and it required a lot of investment, a lot of financial investment for us as an organization. And the reimbursement, I'm going to say, never permanently caught up with us. And Dr. Jacobson talked about the ability to appeal dollars to cover our costs. That was taken away in 2011 by some sweeping regulation that came through. So we are not able to cover our costs anymore. And we had been generating some pretty significant deficits in those programs. So over 2012 and 2013, we spent a great deal of time making sure that we get paid for what we do. We're capturing all the revenue associated with what the services that we provide, and that we do what we get paid for. So the big question for us at the Resource Center within OPWDD services and in all of our service environments is, what will it take to make us break even without compromising care? Because obviously the individuals that we serve are first and foremost. That's our mission. Our mission is to serve individuals with disabilities.
Denise Jones, Associate Executive Director at the Resource Center, talking about some of the challenges they've faced in recent years at TRC. The next speaker at All Aboard was Heather Brown, Assistant Executive Director for Program Operations. She'll talk about a tool they have developed to deal with changing regulations and reimbursements.
I get to talk to you a little bit about something that's really exciting going on at the agency the last couple years, and something that I've presented a lot on. This is the cover of what we've called is our capability statement. It's a document that we started drafting about 2 years ago that kind of outlined our roadmap for the future and where we were going to go for managed care. What we designed was the STARS model. We knew we needed a model to move us into the managed care environment. So when we were working on a project about 2 years ago now in January, we took the work that we had done with our Life Achievement Program and coined it STARS. Then, of course, when we came up with the name STARS, we had to find something that went with it. So we had to call it the System Transformation with Accountability, Results, and Satisfaction. So why did we have to come up with STARS? Again, we're all working towards the premise of our fee-for-service environment is no longer going to exist at some point in the future. We had to ready ourselves for managed care. So we had to kind of bring ourselves up to speed on what the basic premise towards managed care is. And it's outlined well in the Affordable Care Act and the Triple Aim. We need to have better health, we need to have better access to health, and we need to have reduced costs through efficiencies and effectiveness worked in all of our models. What is STARS? You hear a lot about it now. We've had to do a glossary for many of our staff because we've coined so many things with just that word. But really, if you think it's the foundation and the integration work that we're doing. The foundation, this is the main illustration slide that you'll see. It's the STARS 5-point solution, and it really in one slide spells out the entire idea of what it is. It takes the social determinants of health, and what we mean by that is everybody's basic needs has to be paired along with your health and your mental wellness, along with your employment and along with your family stability. We no longer can just look at one of those components. We have to focus all of our environments on the whole person. So what we've designed is very research-based and evidence-based in the work that we've done.
The Resource Center's Heather Brown, Assistant Executive Director for Program Operations, talking about one of the ways that they are coming to terms with a changing environment in terms of regulation, reimbursement for the services they traditionally provide. There's been a great deal of change in the last year or so in the area of mental health care at the Resource Center. Next is Leanna Luca Connolly, Director of Care Coordination and Behavioral Services at the Resource Center, to talk about some of those changes.
I'm here to talk to you about integration of all our mental health programs, because in the past we have had siloed approaches in where the mental health programs have laid. And I know Denise did a very good job to talk about different regulations, but this is in Department of Health area with mental health, with med management, Office of Mental Health, where it comes to outpatient services as well as pros. And then we also have Article 16, which is working with individuals with through Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. So really triaging our mental our mental health programs to work together in an efficient way as a team, and also to provide more of a seamless transition between all those different areas with more of a centralized intake process, which we're really rolling out now. Integration of social services and mental health programs. This just makes sense. And today, where we're moving towards the future, this has given us the opportunity to overlay care coordination and many of the Medicaid service coordination and case management services that we provide. So this has really complemented what we're doing. Co-location.
Leanna Luca Conley is about to address the Kappa Building, the Carl Kappa Building at 880 East 2nd Street in Jamestown, at one time several years ago the administrative offices of the Resource Center. Now, 880 East 2nd, the Kappa Building, has become a key facility for the providing of health services at TRC.
I don't know if anybody's been at Kappa lately. I know our mental health advisory group was able to see some of the transition, and they'll see even more of the transition when we come back next week. But constant changes. We are now co-located. Our outpatient services moved in to be co-located with primary care. Our pros recently moved in December to Kappa as well. We have health home care coordinators there. We have Medicaid service coordinators there. So really, it's created that environment where we should be working together as a team and consistently providing those quality services.
Leanna Luca Conley, the Resource Center's Director of Care Coordination and Behavioral Services. One of the other key components of the Resource Center's work with people with disabilities is to help them find employment. Mike Volk is Director of Rehabilitation and Employment Services. In this segment, taken from All Aboard this past Tuesday night at the Resource Center, he'll be talking about the Ability One program. That's a federal government program that helps persons with disabilities find meaningful work in their communities.
Our Ability One contracts. In the early 90s, we had really one significant contract, and that was the air cargo bag, the A-22. It holds about 2 tons worth of goods, and it's dropped off the back of a cargo plane, and a parachute opens and it lands. Currently, we do a lot of other things. We don't make any products of our own, but we do industrial sewing. We put together first aid kits. We do some research and development prototyping and some kitting. Our success with the Ability One program really is what's made us go. It's made us viable. Again, I said we really don't have our own product, but it's our timeliness in design and our prototyping quality that's kept us alive and going. And of course, everything that we do within the Ability One contract area, 75% of that labor needs to be performed by people with significant disabilities. In December of this past year, we became ISO certified, which really means that it's a way of doing business. It's a way of documenting our standard operating procedures and our policy and procedures. It ensures the quality of our product, which our customers like. Our revenue in the Ability One programs over the last 15, 16 years, as you can see, we started at a little over $100,000 in year one, and we were over $50 million 15 years later. But in the last couple of years, that's dropped off significantly to about 24, 25 million. Really what happened, it was like that perfect storm, as Greg likes to say. There's more competition for that Ability One work. We had the United States budget crisis with the sequester, and there was a drawdown in the Middle East.
Mike Volk talking about the ways the Resource Center is working to help provide meaningful employment for persons with disabilities. He made reference to Greg there. That's Greg Bender, Director of Business Operations at Allied Industries. The next speaker at All Aboard will be a familiar voice to you if you're a regular listener to this program, Steve Watterson, Community Relations Director at the Resource Center. He took a look at some of the other things that happened in 2013.
Advocacy, system transformation, and trying to establish new relationships were some of the trends we experienced in 2013. As most of you probably remember, the year began with Governor Cuomo recommending a $120 million cut in state Medicaid funding to voluntary service providers like the Resource Center. This proposal would have triggered an equal cut in matching federal Medicaid dollars, resulting in a $240 million reduction in services statewide for individuals with developmental disabilities. For TRC, this would have meant the loss of about $2.5 million for the current fiscal year and would have forced the reduction or elimination of some services. On top of the other funding and reimbursement cuts that the state has imposed in the past few years, the governor's proposal would have had a devastating impact not just on the individuals we support and their families, but on people with disabilities and their families across the state. In response, individuals with disabilities, family members, employees, and other interested parties launched a statewide advocacy campaign aimed at getting lawmakers to reject the governor's proposal. The advocacy efforts paid off. Initially, the state legislature passed a budget that aimed to reduce expenses by $90 million, with much of those cost savings to be arrived at through means other than actual service cuts. Weeks later, the legislature came back and passed a measure decreeing that if the state's cost savings efforts did not result in the full $90 million, the state would find other money to make sure there would be no cuts to services. Fresh on the heels of that episode, the state announced that, with an aim of creating more community-based employment opportunities, as of July 1st, 2013, employment and training centers, like the ones we operate on Jones and Gifford Avenue and East Chestnut Street in Dunkirk, could no longer accept new admissions. While people already participating in work centers can continue to do so for the time being, the state has expressed its goal of eliminating work centers altogether. We certainly support the notion of providing more community-based employment options for individuals, but we believe that work centers should remain an employment option. With this in mind, employees with disabilities persuaded Andy Goodell and Congressman Tom Reed's representative to come to the Dunkirk Work Center to tour the area and learn more about this. The workers presented Andy with hundreds of petitions urging the state to maintain work centers as an employment option, and Andy wrote a letter to OPWDD supporting our position. And Senator Young has pledged to advocate for the restoration of work center funding in the 2014 state budget. These two issues are just some examples of the major changes that are impacting the service delivery system. In fact, we just saw some correspondence that came in this afternoon regarding changes in the delivery of day services that are going to be taking place this year. The reality is that New York State and other states are moving from a fee-for-service model to a managed care approach, a radical shift away from the service delivery model that's been in place for decades. This new model operates on a more person-centered, integrated approach that encourages people to have greater control in directing their lives and deciding what services they want to receive. Many people will thrive under this new system, and they'll have the opportunity to do and experience wonderful things that they've never been able to do before. Our concern is that there are many families that are unaware of the pending changes, and unless people know what's going on, they and their loved ones run the risk of being left behind.
Steve Watterson, Community Relations Director at the Resource Center. Today on Share the Vision, we're covering the first ever meeting of all the boards of directors of all the organizations under the general umbrella of the Resource Center. In support of the work that the Resource Center does in helping people with disabilities, there is a foundation, the TRC Foundation. Randy Ordinas is the board chair at the TRC Foundation. He spoke next.
First and foremost, our job is to develop and grow a pool of assets that support the mission of the Resource Center and its various corporations. Secondly is to prudently invest the assets of the foundation to hopefully achieve some sort of goals over the long term. Currently, our goals are to distribute about 5% of the assets annually and to grow the assets of at least the rate of inflation so we can increase the purchasing power or at least preserve the purchasing power of the assets. Third, and probably most importantly, is to distribute grants to the Resource Center and its foundations to try to support the long-term mission of the Resource Center. We find ourselves filling gaps quite frequently where there is no other source of financing to help the Resource Center. In fiscal year 2013, on a net basis, the foundation brought in $43,000 from its fundraising efforts. Keep in mind that that gets netted against programs that have no income. So we were able to sponsor many programs, able to put together some fundraising programs, and the net result is that we added $43,000 to the principal assets of the foundation. Contributions received were about $84,000 last year. Grants distributed were approximately $72,000 last year. And again, we try to give away in grants about 5% of the long-term average market value of the foundation. Given the fact that we've had several great years in a row, that 70,000-ish number should be going up quite substantially over the next 5 to 10 years. The foundation assets earned $342,000 last year. That's approximately 21% return in the year 2013. Over the last 3 years, the foundation has averaged 10% per year. And over the last 5 years, it's averaged 14% per year. So the foundation board is doing a pretty good job at its stewardship, pretty good job at investing the assets of the foundation, and we're certainly growing the principal assets of the foundation.
Randy Ordinas, board chair of the TRC Foundation, on the success the foundation has had in recent years in building a pool of money that can be used to help persons with disabilities, particularly in an environment in which traditional reimbursements are either declining or disappearing. The next part of our program includes representatives from Filling the Gap Incorporated. The Resource Center itself helps people with developmental disabilities. The TRC Foundation raises money to aid in that work. Filling the Gap is a group of other businesses and organizations that either work in tandem with the Resource Center to help people with disabilities or provide services to other populations within the community. In a moment, you will hear from Cynthia Phillips, Vice President of Business and Finance at Filling the Gap. The board chair for Filling the Gap is Mike Felice.
It appears I'm going to complete the circle of entities. Filling the Gap is the parent company of a network of subsidiary corporations. It's also the new home for special events throughout the county. The corporations that I talked about include Community Inclusion, which is primarily a housing organization, Chautauqua Connections, which focuses on children and families at risk, Chautauqua Resources, which is a title-holding entity on properties. New Vision Services is an organization which provides in-home services for the traumatic brain injury and nursing home transition and diversion populations. Now, that's kind of a mouthful. As well as providing guardianship and support broker services. Support Enterprises, which is the only for-profit organization within the network, is primarily a manufacturing and product engineering organization. We also provide janitorial and leased employment services. And finally, Team Services, which is a transportation company. Now, the companies do operate separately from each other, but all reports do go directly to Filling the Gap. And nothing is finalized until it goes to Filling the Gap and approved by its board of directors. There's been a lot of interesting and amazing things that have happened within this corporate structure over the past few years. A personal thought before we move on and tell the rest of the story. I think Filling the Gap is more than just the name of a company. I see it as a statement, a commitment, in spite of the adversities and cutbacks and so on, that provides gaps in the service that we really never stop trying to fill those gaps. So we can provide those services that were started over 50 years ago. We should never stop trying to do that. Now, to tell the rest of the story, I'd like to introduce Cindy Phillips, who is Vice President of Business and Finance. Come on up.
As Mike mentioned, Filling the Gap is the parent corporation for all these extra corporation, little sister corporations to TRC, and it provides all the subsidiaries primarily with the administrative support. When we first started, we were buying staff time from the Resource Center to do all of this. And over the last several years, even though we're still buying things like IT services, legal, risk management, we've actually grown the infrastructure within Filling the Gap quite extensively. We have a great dedicated team. Some of those have been hired from outside the agency, and there are several of us have grown right up with those organizations, myself included. Vicki Bardo actually are now employees of Filling the Gap. We've got a great team going on. We've also, this past year, have moved into our own corporate headquarters, and so we're not in with the Resource Center, and it gives us a better identity out in the community. So that's a great thing that's happened with us this past year.
Cynthia Phillips, Vice President of Business and Finance at Filling the Gap, talking about how Filling the Gap Incorporated and the other subsidiary corporations work with the Resource Center. Next, you'll hear from Mike Suppa. He's Vice President of Planning and Operations. He'll tell you a little bit about support Enterprises, Incorporated.
Support Enterprises consists of some different businesses. The major one is our cut and sew manufacturing business, and Harold Roberts, who's sitting over here, he's our general manager of our facility here in Jamestown and oversees our operations and production on a day-to-day basis down at the landings. Some of you came over and toured that. We've recently expanded that site and our space capacity there. We also provide temporary employment services to the Resource Center on a contract basis. And we also have a couple custodial contracts. One is our building at Mazzani, and the other, for a number of years, we've done the City Hall facility.
Mike Suppa, Vice President of Planning and Operations, talking about Support Enterprises, the only for-profit sister corporation at the Resource Center. We're covering All Aboard today on Share the Vision, the inaugural gathering of members of the boards of directors of the Resource Center, TRC Foundation, and the Filling the Gap Network. In the remainder of today's show, just a couple of other speakers to help you understand the breadth and depth of the programs and services offered through Filling the Gap. The next speaker is Patrick Smeraldo, consultant for Chautauqua Connections, Incorporated.
4 years ago, the mission of the Children's Connection Initiative, under the auspices of Chautauqua Connections, Inc., was to offer a unique, independent, countywide, action-oriented, interagency collaborative program with efforts aimed at prevention and healthy child development, which is targeted towards children with disabilities, developmental delays, or who are living in poverty, and that is designed to share staff, facilities, and expertise from proven human service agencies in Chautauqua County. The initiative focused on children 0 to 5 and their families at risk. We wanted to understand the system, collect data, analyze the data, and gaps in services for the population. Our outcome information would lead to increased communication between service agencies, avoid duplication of services, develop collaborations in working together, and ultimately decrease gaps in service, and that ultimately all children will receive all services which they are entitled to receive.
Patrick Smeraldo, talking about the Children's Connection Initiative through Chautauqua Connections, Incorporated, one of the subsidiary corporations at the Resource Center. And finally, you'll hear from Terry Johnson, manager of New Vision Services, Incorporated, about the essence of their work.
Historically, we have been providing services to individuals that are in the traumatic brain injury waiver. We've been doing that since 2005, but we noticed there was a population that we hadn't tapped into. So we started providing services under the NHTD waiver. It's the Nursing Home Transition and Diversion Waiver. So we added the waiver to the services we provide under New Vision in 2012 at the very end of the year, and that took about a year to go through that process and develop our application and get that approved. So we were now able to serve anybody that was nursing home eligible that wanted to remain in their home. We began working with the first person under this service in March of 2013, and we provide 3 key services, and these are the services we provide under both the TBI waiver and the NHTD waiver. The first is our HCSS services, Home and Community Support Services. That's really the meat and potatoes of what we do. That's our personal care aides going into somebody's home and providing them whatever skills they need so that they can remain safely in their home. The other one is independent living skills training. That is somebody going in and working with somebody to help teach them some skills that they may have lost as a result of their injury or their disability. And then the last is service coordination. Everybody that's in either of these waivers has to have a service coordinator to write their plans and approve their plans.
Terry Johnson, talking a little bit about New Vision services. Today on Share the Vision, we've offered coverage of All Aboard, the first ever gathering of members of the boards of directors of the Resource Center, TRC Foundation, and the Filling the Gap Network. We hope through this half-hour radio program you've come to know more about the services offered through the Resource Center, TRC Foundation, and Filling the Gap, and also learned about some of the challenges that each of those organizations faces today. If you'd like any more information on anything you've heard on this radio show today, I encourage you to contact the Resource Center. For now, on behalf of all who participated in All Aboard and were heard on Share the Vision today, thank you for sharing the vision today.